So in this module, we're going to talk about some of the technology behind what gives a lot of these artists that we've been looking at the ability to make the work that they make. I know that primarily we've been talking about all these different artists and those artists kind of being connected to art movements and significant time periods in the history of photography. Now we're going to look at some of this technology. The two primary things that we're going to look at is we are going to look at tiny cameras and color film. Actually, that camera on the left would have been a physical working camera. Probably would have been referred to as something like a spy camera or something like that, and almost more of a novelty item. If you look closely, it's actually just made of like stamped metal parts and is not very sophisticated in its technological use of aperture, shutter, and film ISO. But connected deeply to tiny cameras, which we'll talk about first, is first off, roll film, and secondly, 35 millimeter film. So I'm gonna back up just a second here and actually talk to you about Kodak. I have a video for you guys to watch about Kodak. That's quite significant. Actually, a couple different videos that talk about kind of the rise and fall of Kodak, the significance of them. But Kodak was founded by the man here on the right, which is George Eastman. He had a silent partner named Harry Strong, and this company was founded in 1888. And during most of the 20th century, really Kodak is the absolute dominant, not only film producer, but camera producer, chemical producer. If you took photographs in the United States in almost all of the entirety of the 20th century, you would have used Kodak film. You may have used different cameras from other parts of the world, but if you started those initial cameras, which were called Brownies that Kodak made, and I've got a history of the Brownie camera for you guys to watch as well, they all come from Kodak. And it's significant to say that George Eastman is one of the people that invents roll film. And roll film is very significant because roll film allows you to take a picture, advance the film, take another picture. Before then, people were using plates. Kodak actually helps produce dry plate processes, which didn't really exist before then. There are some dry plate processes, but this is, very significant that they're making a dry plate process. Also, they make a safety film. And before this Kodak safety film was primarily made of nitrate-based film stock, which was highly explosive. If anyone has seen the film Inglourious Bastards, there's a famous scene where they blow up the movie theater by lighting the film on fire, and it is so incredibly explosive that even kept in a light tight canister in a warehouse, it will self-destruct. There's countless warehouses that were in LA that were the warehouses for movie storage for films shot in Hollywood. There's so many films that are just completely destroyed and don't even exist anymore because they were filmed on nitrate-based film stock. So Eastman, Kodak, with their companies making this safety film, really made a big impact. And roll film was something that, allowed people to take multiple pictures instead of changing the plates periodically. Take a picture, take a whole film holder out, change the direction of it, put it back in, and keep interchanging things before taking every picture. This sped things up, and it also made it much more accessible, and made it much more put cameras in the hands of everyday people rather than people who could afford these kind of sophisticated cameras with sophisticated equipment. So anyway, back to 35 millimeter film. This was actually a film that was used widely by the motion picture industry, really until just a handful of years ago. There's still some films actually shot on 35 millimeter film. But it's on a plastic stock, and what's significant about it is that it has these sprocket holes that you see on either side. Those sprocket holes help the film move through the roller transport system of the camera. So as you advance the camera, for, say, a motion picture camera, it keeps that film synchronized so that things don't speed up or slow down. If you watch old Buster Keaton films, you would notice the speed varies widely in that. So this allows them to keep a consistent rate of movement through the camera. There was a camera manufacturer by the name of Leica, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit. And Leica actually uses this film format. Here's a few different things. You can see on the right here is like would have been cinematic film. So the film is placed, vertically within the camera. Typically today we see 35 millimeter film cameras. If you take like a darkroom photo class in school or something like that, you'll see your film pretty much moves horizontally through the camera. That's the main difference between cinematic film and still camera film. The also here, just so you have a little bit of a sense of like the size of this film, 35 millimeter refers to the distance from one edge of the film to the other edge of the film. That is 35 millimeters. A frame of 35 millimeter film in a still camera is 28 millimeters, because you're missing the sprocket holes, by 35 millimeters. And it is approximately a 2 to 3 aspect ratio. You'll notice like there's different aspect ratios depending on different like digital cameras and televisions and things like that. So here we see a standard 35 millimeter frame. If you go see an IMAX movie, you see it's actually probably 4 times the size surface area of 35 millimeter film. Some other ones, if you're maybe familiar with like old, your grandparents, like Super 8 movies or 16 millimeter movies, this is the size. It's so minute compared to that 35 millimeter. So 35 millimeter is a significant sized film. This film, which is being produced for the movie picture industry, this company, there was actually this company called Ernst Lights, who made a lot of different German optics for microscopes and for telescopes and things like that. Primarily, they were like a lens manufacturer. There was a guy there who was working at Ernst Lights by the name of Oscar Barnack. And Oscar Barnack, in 1913, has this idea of like, instead of making a camera and then making film for that camera, he was like, let's build a camera around an existing and widely used film format. And so they chose 35 millimeter film, and he invents the Leica camera. Leica is still a company, still produces cameras to this day. This is the very first camera that you're looking for, which was called the Ur-Leica, like UR-Leica, from 1914. This is a little bit slightly more modernized. This is from 1925. Oscar Barnack was in charge of research and development at Lights, and really loved this cinematic film and attempted to make something that was very compact. Most of the cameras that we had at this time were the smallest film that you would have would be 4 inches by 5 inches, and the camera was really quite large. This camera was easily held in a single hand. It was lightweight, very portable, could even fit into a pocket. So Leica made this really fantastic, beautiful camera with good German engineering, lots of f-stops and shutter speeds, a roller transport system. These knobs on top would move the film through the camera. A viewfinder was mounted on top, so you're not actually looking through the lens, you're looking through a separate viewfinder, which instead of, in more traditional cameras, you would actually look through the entire body of the camera, which meant that you had to take the back off or take film out to be able to photograph. This, having that viewfinder on top, allowed the film to be transported through the camera and pictures taken immediately, and this gave you a pretty good approximation of what the actual lens was seeing. Here's some other examples. The the Leica M1, which is on the right, a very highly collectible camera. This one in beautiful shape. And a relatively modern, 2014 M9, which Leica makes a couple different kinds of cameras. They make an R series, which is a single lens reflex where you look through the lens, and they make a rangefinder, and the rangefinders are designated with the M badge. I will actually put on D2L in your supplementary material for this module a little bit of a Leica family tree, so you have a good sense of what cameras Leica made, and see kind of the development of that series of camera. And like I said, these cameras are still manufactured today and are highly, highly sought after pieces of equipment. And they're very expensive cameras. Lights, which and Leica and Zeiss are all deeply interconnected German camera parts manufacturers, and these are like the best of the best. Now, Leica invents this, but this isn't the only game in town. Kodak makes some versions of 35 millimeter cameras. This is actually a 1948 version of a camera called the Retina. It was a really well-loved Kodak camera. Interesting is that actually, if you look really closely, you can see that it says a Schneider lens on it. This camera, along with its lenses, were actually made in Germany. The Retinas were manufactured in Stuttgart, Germany, at a company called Nagel Camera Work, which Kodak actually acquired in 1931 and sold under the Kodak nameplate. This was a very good Kodak camera. Also from Ann Arbor, Michigan, was the Argus. Lots of people own Arguses in the United States. This is affectionately referred to as the Brick. Very heavy-duty camera. In Japan, the Brick really sort of translates into something like the lunchbox. Not really a beautiful camera. It's very functional, and so like the engineering of it is as simple and as functional as it can be. But a very nice camera. So really like these, if you're taking pictures at the turn of the 20th century, you would be using one of these cameras. You would be using a Leica, some sort of Kodak camera. This is a little bit later. This is 1948. You'd probably be using like a Kodak Brownie camera, or you'd be using an Argus camera. And definitely there was variations, but those are the three primary cameras. And like I said, be sure to watch some of that supplemental material about Kodak, about the Brownie camera, the rise and fall of Kodak, and all that. Back to this slide about this. Kodak is really this. I can't stress to you how important Kodak is to the history of photography. To this day, you can still go to the George Eastman House in New York and visit and kind of see. There's a huge museum centered around that. It's actually in Rochester, New York, not in Manhattan. Just wanted to be clear about that. In case you go to Manhattan and go looking for it, you're not going to find it. I think that's it for now. So the next module, we're going to talk about color film and kind of the advancements and the technology behind that.